Hey guys, welcome back to yet another episode of Top Billers Toolkit, where me and my twin brother interview top billers from all around the globe to unlock the secrets to their success. Today's guest is Craig Picken. Craig is a seven-figure biller, and the famous phrase that he is known for is "there's no money in the low end." Craig manages to hit seven figures doing just 25 deals a year. Each deal is worth anywhere between $70,000 to $100,000. In today's episode, we're going to be talking about why going after higher end fees is one of the best ways to hit seven figures as a recruiter. We're going to be going into Craig's story and understanding more about his journey from the Navy to high end property to then recruitment. And Craig is going to be sharing with us why he's found it so valuable surrounding himself with high net worth individuals and why his powerful network is one of his biggest tools in his toolkit. Guys, as usual, grab a cuppa or a glass of wine, depending on when you're listening to this, and let's get into it, shall we? Craig, thank you so much for coming on today, my friend. I am really excited about this podcast episode. How are you?
Good, Ben. Good to see you guys out there.
Awesome, mate. Yeah, really looking forward to this one. And I think it's going to be quite a different guest because I know you work at quite a senior level, Craig. But I'm going to start off with the first question, which is, what's the number one tool in your toolkit, whether it be a mindset, strategy, or software?
I don't use any software. I've got a CRM, which I really don't particularly care for, which I don't particularly care for, candidly, and I'll probably change that out in the next couple of months. So software is not other than Outlook. That's about the only. So software is Outlook. The number one tool is an iPhone with AirPods, a branded pad of paper, which my daughter bought me a whole bunch of for Christmas.
Nice.
And a pen.
I love that.
And those are the tools. Those are the tools.
Love that. So that is proper old school, isn't it, Craig? I'm quite amazed that you're doing the figures that you mentioned at the level you are, and you're pretty much kind of relying on the good old kind of foundational old school stuff.
The world does not have to get overly complicated. You know, you could use as much software as you want, or you can do as much lead gen as you want, or, things like that. I find that just kind of the phone, piece of paper, notes, Outlook, you don't need a whole lot more than that. I use Zoom. Obviously Zoom quite a bit. I've got a podcast I do. So it's a mix of stuff, but it's not overly complicated, to be honest with you.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So if it's not softwares, if there was one thing if it was like the one thing that you think has contributed to your success, Craig, what could you say it was, do you think?
There's no money in the low end. And I'll just say that's a mindset that I've, look, there's no money in the low end. And how I got to this place is you see airplanes in my back wall, pictures of airplanes in my back wall. I flew airplanes in the Navy for 8 years.
Wow.
When I got out of the Navy, I went to work for two aircraft business jet manufacturers, and they sold very expensive products. And you understand, how much money is in the top end and how much, versus, look, you could go sell a whole lot of really inexpensive things, or you could sell a few expensive things. And I'm kind of I'd rather just sell a few of the expensive things. In between starting my recruiting practice in 2008 and the end of my business jet career in 2003, I spent 5 years in very high-end real estate development, dealing with very wealthy people. And once again, it created a mindset of, where do you want to be? So that's how I started that's the mindset I started my recruiting practice with.
That's really interesting. Go ahead, Sam. No, I'm just interested. I just want to go back to 2003. You just left the Navy and you went into high-end real estate, Craig, which is quite a stark difference, isn't it? It's like going from the Navy, from a certain salary that you're getting, to then going into high-end real estate where the numbers are absolutely limitless and you're probably meeting very high net worth individuals. What was that was that very natural for you to move into that? And how did you end up there in the first place?
Well, the mindset was, so I left the Navy and then I went to work for Gulfstream aircraft. I was at Gulfstream Aircraft for 4 years. Then I went to Bombardier Business
Cool.
Jets for 3 years.
Yeah.
Um, and then, look, from as I tell, and this is it's a great story I tell candidates too. When they're in transition period in their lives, my boss and I at Bombardier just did not like each other. He
Mm.
hated me.
Mm.
He hated me about as much as I hated him. And one day, the world just kind of looked up and said, "Hey, it's time for us to part ways." I parted ways, and it was great. I loved it. The transition was some folks I knew were doing a very, very high-end real estate project. Um, we started talking about it. I was actually on my way to another interview in New York City with another business jet company, and they said, "Hey, stop and see us along the way." I did. Loved what they had to say. Loved what they were doing. Called the guys in New York City and said, "I'm not coming." So that's how I got into the real estate business.
Mm.
Um, Spent 5 years there. It was great. It was dealing with, uber wealthy people, people I've been dealing with in the business jet side of the house.
Mm.
And, and I was good. I was good. I was good. It was very easy for me to relate to them. It was very easy to connect with them. I understood, what they were looking for. It's never about me. It's always about them.
Mm.
And if you go a little bit further than the next guy, in dealing with them, you will gain their trust, their respect, their referrals, their business. And that's what I decided to do with my executive recruiting practice.
I love that. And
Interesting.
were there any, because it sounds like you spent a lot of time around people who are making a lot of money, Craig, which is very interesting. And I'm sure you've heard some stories. Are there any things that you've picked up on from spending a lot of time with these people in terms of habits, mindset, things that they've taught you along the way? I'm just curious, if you're spending so much time with them, there must be something that has rubbed off onto you.
Yeah, I mean, what's the most important thing to them? It's them.
Mm.
What do they want? They want solutions. What do they want? They want honesty. They're people too. And when they're wealthy, they know that everybody is, trying to get into their pocket. And when you come at them with, when you work with them in an honest, straightforward approach, and even when you have a bad answer for them, and you say, "Look, you're not going to like this answer, but it's the best one I got right now, and I'm going to just, we're all adults here. Let's talk about it." Um, they respect that, and that's the way, that's the way that what I learned was that, not everything's going to be perfect. It's going to be hard work, but when you deal with it in a head-on manner, it becomes a whole lot easier, and you gain their respect. And that's that's the best way to get down that path.
Mm. Interesting. In the pre-call, Craig, you said something quite controversial. You said quit being a recruiter, which I thought was quite interesting. What do you mean when you said that? Do you mind elaborating?
Yeah, I'll tell you, yeah, and I'll be as blunt on this as I can, and hopefully it resonates. I hate recruiters. Can't stand them. Um, because they're transactional.
Mm.
And you know, I, there are people that I know that are executive recruiters and they're great, and they're not executive recruiters. They are business consultants. They can look through a balance sheet. They can see cash flow problems. They can see business problems. They're so deep in businesses that they know the problems of the business before the business owners do or the business leaders
Mm.
do.
Mm.
And they just there say, "Hey, look, have you thought about this? Or have you ever met this person who maybe could help you or could guide you in a different way?" The best executive recruiters are consultants. And they're
Mm.
not dealing with talent management. They're not dealing with HR. And they're not making 1,000 cold calls a year with some transactional, with some transactional, whatever you want to call it. They're strategic advisors.
Mm.
And, that's what a really good recruiter is. I'm on LinkedIn all the time, and I see what people are putting out there, and it's like, oh yeah, yeah. Um, you know, if you want to be a really successful executive recruiter, then learn business. Learn the fundamentals of business and learn what businesses need, want, must have at every level to thrive and survive. Not just
Mm.
survive, but thrive.
Can
Love
we
that.
can we jump in and give a real example of that, Craig? 'Cause I'm curious what that looks like in reality. So if I was a fly on the wall in one of your conversations with any of you and your clients, what are you advising them on a business level that's helped you maybe secure more business or helped you build trust or help them succeed? I'm just curious what that looks like in real life.
Look, I can have business conversations with any of my clients, and the business conversation is, it's, you know, I see why we're talking. You know, here's what your competitors are doing. Here's what's happening in the market. A lot of private equity, just have, private equity groups will call me up and go, hey, we're thinking about something in the industry. We want to look at, great example. A private equity group was looking at a parts business. They wanted to go buy just an aircraft parts business. I'm like, well, why that? There's no intellectual property. It's, the only value of the business is really what's on the shelves. What's your plan moving forward? And
Mm.
when you ask them the hard questions, they're like, well, this is kind of what it is. And it's like, well, you can do that if you want, but here's what happened with another private equity group that I worked with that tried to do the exact same thing. And here's why they didn't succeed with it. So if you want to go
Mm.
down this path, don't be like them. And oh, by the way, here's three people that you might want to meet along the way who can help you. So
Mm.
now what
Love
have I
that.
done? I've said, okay, here's why these guys failed. I put some questions in their mind to make them think a little bit deeper as to why. Why do you want to do this? What do you think your upside is from a, you know, IRR perspective or an investment perspective? Do you really know what you're doing? And do you know the best people out there who could potentially guide or help you? Like, okay, we thought about it. They ended up walking away from that business.
Mm.
Mm,
Love
great
that.
example.
Must
Um,
just must position you in such a different light as well when you're able to give them that kind of advice. It's like it's just night and day, isn't it? From a transactional recruiter to a business consultant, it's just crazy.
Well, you can walk away from things. What's power? Power is when you can walk away from it. It's not for me.
Mm.
It's, hey, look, I don't care what you guys do. If you want to do that, that's great. If you want my help, yeah, okay. Um, but if I were you, I wouldn't do that. That's just kind of, if I wouldn't do that if I were you guys. But if that's the path you want to go down and you need some help, okay, call me. We'll talk through it. So um,
Love that.
it's just it's understanding business.
Mm. I'd love to jump to the next question, Craig, which is you talked about a dartboard approach to building expertise in a vertical. Um, can you elaborate if there's because I think a lot of people, a lot of recruiters understand the value of niching and building in a vertical, but it's easier said than done. And you've obviously done this successfully now, and you've probably got other friends and recruiters that have done the same. What's the if there was like a process or a step-by-step map that we could give other people, what would you say?
So from day one, I thought of my business as a dartboard. And what I said
Mm,
was from day one, look, you're not going to step into a business and not going to start doing, the C-suite. You're going to grow to it.
Mm.
And I said, all right, I'm going to start the center point of my practice is all aviation, aerospace companies. And I said that, the dartboard, the bullseye on the dartboard, the little red dot will be general managers. And why general managers? Because they're pretty integral. They're P&L, typically profit and loss leaders. And I said, all right, from a general manager, I'll learn the general managers. And if I want to go down a step, I'm learning their directors of operations. If I want to go, if I go two steps out from the bullseye down, I get the director of operations and the ops managers. So I'm learning I'm learning those folks. Ops managers will become directors of operations. Directors of operations will become eventually general managers. If I go up from the general manager, I'll figure out who the chief operating officer is and eventually who the CEO or the CEO is. So I can build a relation there. If I go to the right, I'm into the CFO, the finance side. If I go to the left, I'm kind of into the admin side, more of the sales, VPs of sales, whatever. So if I put that's the way I looked at the business. And I used to have, I got a whiteboard over here, and I used to have a little diagram for every business that I wanted to know. I'd say, all right, here are the key people, who are the general managers, and who are the, 5, 6, 10 key people around that general manager in each business that I was either doing business with or wanted to do business with.
Love that.
So it was a process that I had in my own mind of who are the people I need to know
Really, really interesting.
At any given moment.
And so, just to clarify, when you started the business, you were like, general managers are going to be the most valuable people to start placing because I can expand in different avenues by knowing these people and placing them. Am I right in saying that, Craig?
Yeah, that would be a good, who's the best relationship to know? Like when I started in 2008, right in the business, right at the cusp of 2008, 2009, there was a global recession. We were in the middle of a global recession. If you remember, go back that far. And I looked at my wife. I had this thing called the World Aviation Directory. It's not printed anymore, but it was about that thick. It's a book about that thick. And I looked at it, and I had it, and I looked at my wife, and I go, "Where do you think we started this thing?" And she goes, "How about A?" I go, "Okay, A." My first client was in the A's, and then we built a good relationship. And I was like, "All right, I got it." And that's how we started. That's how I started figuring out the dartboard theory. Who do I want to know? And each of these, here's my client. Who do I want to know in each of their competitors? And that was the process that I mapped for myself. My first year in business, I think I did, I don't know, 10 general manager level, ops director level placements, some salespeople in there. Didn't do great, but it was, it was great. It was okay. I made $250,000 my first year. I said, all right, if I can do $250,000 this year, can I do 30% more next year? Well, yeah, probably. So there you go.
That.
So
it's really interesting. I get the feeling that you are a master at building relationships, Craig. And I'm sure it's evolved a lot since the general manager period up until now. If there were some tips and tricks that other people might be able to use to building relationships, what could you add, do you think? What if someone was good at building relationships, but they could get better, if there was something that you could, if you were training someone to build relationships more effectively, what would you say to them?
There is nothing stronger than presence. Hard work, you make your own luck. And this is something that, I not just to recruiters, but I talk to executives out there, people calling me, I'm struggling in my career or whatever else. I go, nothing beats hard work. And hard work creates luck, creates luck. And when you have luck, it goes, a lot of times it just goes your way. So I'll give you, I'll give you, for instance, I had a client up in Connecticut. I live in North Carolina. Connecticut is about a 12-hour drive, 13-hour drive from me. The president of a company in Connecticut said, hey, I started talking to him and he's like, hey, why don't you just come on up and see what we're doing? All right, great. Well, I was a little resource limited at the time. So I jumped in my car and I drove to Philadelphia, which is about an 8-9 hour drive from me. And I went and saw a potential customer in Philadelphia, stayed overnight, drove to Connecticut, went and met with the president of this company. And in that meeting, he introduced me to 6 of his direct reports. So I thought I was going to meet with him for an hour. I was willing to go that far for an hour meeting with him. He said, I want to introduce you to each of my 6 direct reports. Now, each of his 6 direct reports said, hey, I've got this need. Can you help me with this need? I'm like, yeah, can help with a need. So, the willingness to drive 800 or 900 miles to go see a client for what I thought was a meeting, which turned into 6 meetings. And that relationship is, I'll just give you, kind of an idea how much that relationship has been over 15 years. It's been about $1 million on revenue. So when I think about, this person introduced me to this person who introduced me to this person, I could probably map it out. It's probably been over $1 million, including a placement I just got not too long ago.
Interesting.
So look, it's hard work. I mean, it's, I took a search for a CEO last year. The client was in California. I'm like, look, and they called me up. They were referred to me by an attorney. I'm like, I got to go take a look at this thing. I couldn't grasp exactly what they're getting. I said, look, how about next week? What are you guys doing next week? Like, come on out. So I got on a plane at 6 o'clock in the morning in North Carolina, and I flew to San Francisco, met them at noon, spent all afternoon with them, had dinner with them, got on the red eye flight home. 24 hours later, I'm back in my office. I'm like, all right, I get it. I get it. How many recruiters do you think are out there that are willing to go fly all the way across country to go meet a client and then fly all the way back and be in the office on the phone with them the next day going, all right, I understand what you're looking for. Here's what we're going to do. And oh, by the way, I didn't bill them for the flight either.
How do you know, Craig? Because if you were doing that like every day, like it would be, how would you know where to spend your time? Because you can't get on every plane and meet every single client, can you? So if I was in your shoes or a noob recruiter who wanted to do something similar, how do I know when to implement that presence instead of like a client who might be wasting time? How do you assess it?
Well, you're talking to them. It's really hard for them to waste your time when you're right there in front of them, because then you sit there and you look around the eye. And go, are we dancing? Or are we wasting each other's time? And you talk about it. You ask them. You ask them a lot of. It's all in the conversations. We had 3 or 4 or 5 conversations before that. I knew it was going to be a retained search. But I want to know what exactly, nothing beats seeing it, touching it, feeling it, understanding the culture, understanding the business. And then you can talk about it better to the people that you're trying to recruit for that role. It was, it was essential. Conferences, something I talk to young executives about. Well, just because your boss didn't send you to the conference doesn't mean you can't go. You get some personal time off and go take a day, or even just say to your boss, hey, look, you don't want to pay for this, but can I just go to this conference without taking a vacation day? And 99 times out of 100, they're going to say, yeah. It's like, hey, look, it shows you're investing in yourself. So you go to a conference and you show up at a conference with a pocket full of business cards, and you go make friends. And you learn something.
Sorry, Craig, I just wanted to jump in there because it's fascinating, and I completely understand why going the extra mile would help you to win business. I definitely know recruiters that maybe haven't gone as far as you, Craig, but do go in and meet people in person when they can, but maybe won't get the same level of success that you do. So are there any nuances that you've learned to building relationships with these guys, like nuances in what they like to talk about, in how to get closer to them, and how to get them on side? Are there any nuances that you can give in terms of what you've learned?
They're people. They're people. And once again, it's all about them. If you know their kids' names, if you know them, if you know the kids' names, if you know where they live, if you know something about them, just go talk. It's a lot of times you're just talking about stupid things, weather, whatever. It's not. There's a private equity guy. I'll just give you. He passed away. Passed away about 10 years ago, but his name was Kevin Landry. Kevin Landry was the founder of a private equity group out of Boston called TA Associates. TA Associates, I haven't followed them lately, but Kevin was probably worth $1 billion or more. And he was a client of mine, a long time ago, he was a client of mine. And we started talking about airplanes, and he was a pilot. and he flew his own airplane. And I was like, hey, and then he found out I worked at Gulfstream and Bombardier. So we started talking about airplanes all the time, and he flew a TBM and turboprop, and talk about his TBM and what he's trying to do. And one day he said, "Yeah, I've been trying to upgrade my TBM. I want to go buy the next model, but I can't get these guys to call me back." Which is kind of crazy. You think that, and I'm like, "Hey, let me." I made a phone call for the guy. I called a friend of mine. Said, "Hey, why don't you call this guy? He's got a TBM 700. He wants to upgrade to an 850. He's worth a trash load of money. Um, you know, it might behoove you to give him a call. Here's his phone number." Sure enough, and I used to call up Kevin, the guy sits on, he was on the board of, TD Ameritrade and some big companies. But I would just call him out of the blue and just say, "Hey, how are you doing? What's going on at TA? How's your airplane doing?" And then one day I wrote him, I saw an article about, TBMs, and I emailed it to him, and he wrote me a note back, and he's like, "Hey, I lost my medical. I've got cancer, and I can't fly anymore." And I was like, "Holy crap, what can I do for you?" He's like, "Nothing. The people good at Boston Mass are taking good care of me." But that's how you build relationships. You find what is it that they have interest in their lives, their kids, their businesses, whatever. And, when you go to conference and you have you get a copy of the attendee list in advance. Who's here that I might want to know, or who's here that I do know and can introduce me to somebody else. But it's not forced. It's you're generally trying to build friendships and relationships. The business part is secondary to the friendship and the relationship.
Reminds me of another chap that we interviewed a lot further on in his career, but he said that when he first started, he couldn't build any relationships. Well, he said it was difficult because he couldn't resonate with like senior executives and their lives. He didn't have kids. He didn't do any of the hobbies they did. And so it was really difficult for him to resonate. And then he said he found out what they like to do, and then he actually went to do those things. And then he said as soon as he did that, it was way easier to build relationships because he could find common ground between like hiking or sports or paddle or things that they would do on the weekend, if that makes sense. So that's kind of what I thought about there. Just like find out what your clients like to do and try and ingrain yourself into their world, because it's quite rare, Craig, I'm guessing, that you're going to find someone who likes planes and you're a pilot. That's like one in, I'm guessing, 100,000 or something. I don't know how many pilots are around the world, but it's probably quite rare, right? So,
but it's more than that. It is understanding what's important to, I'm going way out of my executive recruiting background, but I'm in fact, it's I ran into a client one day in my real estate days, and when they just started talking, it wasn't a client, we just started talking. And I was like, "Hey, come on, let me show you what we're doing here." I was kind of bored, and nothing going on. I was out and about, just walking around, taking some pictures or something like that. And they pulled up in a car, and we just started talking. And I said, "Hey, come on, let me just show you what we're doing around here." And she was an interior designer, and multi-million-dollar properties, and no expectation at all. "Hey, come on, let me just show you what's going on." Good way for me to kill a couple hours, talk to some nice people. They literally called me up about an hour or two later and said, "Hey, that $4 million house that you showed us, that I'm like, "Yeah, of course I do. Yeah, like, can we buy that?" Like, yeah, you can buy that. Yeah, you can make. Yeah, sure, we'll sell that to you. It was a house that it was a spec home that we built. It was a big model home that we built. And I'm like, "Yeah, we'll sell it to you."
That's so interesting.
Yeah. $100,000, $100,000 a day. That's how you build relationships. You get out of your office, and you get out of your office, and you go take genuine interest in other people.
Yeah, that's really good. And it sounds simple, and I think you make it sound very easy, Craig? And maybe it is. Maybe people overcomplicate it. Maybe that's the thing. Maybe people do overcomplicate the idea of building relationships. But I also think you've probably got a skill set and maybe a natural way of communicating that resonates with a lot of these people. But what I'd like to jump onto is on the pre-call, you mentioned something that resonated with me, which is when I asked you, how do you get your foot through the door with people? You went through a process where you said you literally go out and you find the best people in the market, you build relationships with them, and then you use that as leverage to speak to CEOs and solve their problems. Can you, again, for people that aren't used to attracting the top 1% of candidates, can you give us some insight into how you do that?
Sure. Happy to. Conversations. Good questions. So, great conversation I had with a CEO last week. We're thinking about doing something that looks like X. We want to build a new sales team for this vertical, and this is what it would all look like. I know the company well. He's like, how would you do? What would you think? And I'm like, well, here's what I do. The best person at this company, the best sales VP at this company is, Joe Smith. And he's great. And everybody knows him. And if you could figure out how to attract him, get him to walk across the street, he'd be great. But underneath Joe is a couple of really good people here or somebody else over here. So immediately in the first couple minutes of the conversation, we're talking names, we're talking people. It's like, this is who I would go for. This is who I would think about attracting. They're making about this much money. So you're going to have to figure out a way to, up the ante for them or figure out what's in their life. And it's not one of them. Let's just go find you. It's a matter of understanding who the top players are at some of the other companies. So when you know who the players are, when you know who the players are, you have a pretty good idea of where you're going to go, where you're going to start first. And, you call those people up. Hey, Joe Smith. Hey, it's Craig down here in North Carolina. You open for a conversation on some very quiet conversation on something. Yeah, let's talk. And when you know the best players in the market, you can have dialogue, you can have different dialogues. Or if you're just 1 or 2 degrees of separation, I guarantee you, a lot of people and a lot of the top players in the market know who I am. In my industry, know who I am. And if I call them, it's a warm call. Hey, we haven't chatted in a couple of years. We've never met before, but this is who I am. So and so suggested I reach out to you. You open for a call. I'm like, yeah, I know you are. Let's chat. Like, okay.
It's really interesting, Craig. Because you've obviously built up like an insane network and presence in your market, Craig. What I want to do is go back to a point in time when that presence wasn't as big, and I'm guessing, again, me and Ben might be overcomplicating it. Judging by your ethos, it seems to be simplified in a positive way. But let's go back to a time when your presence wasn't as strong. How are you getting A players to speak to you and give you the time of day? Is it as simple as just calling them up and saying, I've got an opportunity? And then is it as simple as that, or are me and Ben missing something?
No, it's a function of, yeah, hey, look, this is who I am. I'm Craig up in North Carolina. I'm an executive recruiter. I focus on these positions. We haven't met. You open for dialogue. You open for a conversation. If you send if you send 100 of those emails out, personalized, you get 30 responses. You had 30 conversations. So 30 conversations, you built 30 relationships. And then, it grows from there. It's not something that happens overnight. It's work. But it's being able to have a conversation with somebody to say, hey, this is kind of what I'm seeing in the market. This is what I'm doing. This is what I'm hearing. Can you take 10 minutes for an introduction? Like, yeah, we can do that. And then once the searches started coming, it was, I'm working with this company on this search. Can we have a chat? Or I just worked with this company on this search, looking to build my network because other people are calling me. Are you open for a dialogue? So they know that you work with, they know the companies I work with. They get it. I'm like, hey, maybe this is somebody I need to know. No, look, it's not gonna work for everybody, but you take what you can. But you work slowly and you methodically and just go down a path.
Love that. So you send 100 personalized emails, you get let's just say 30% back, build those relationships. How do you, this might be a really simple question, but I'm interested in how you did this. How do you know who the top players were, Craig? You sent 100 emails, you must be sending them to people who you know are top performers to some degree. How do you know, how did you find that they are top performers in the first place?
It's like I said, it's work and it's research and it's understanding the companies that you're like. Yeah, I've been doing a lot of stuff in the jet engine arena. Just, jet engines. People are like, well, jet engines. So, yeah, yeah. What about them? I go, you make them, you build them, people trade them. There's a brokerage, they fix them. There's a whole industry just around jet engines.
Hmm.
So for a long time, I said, all right, who are all the general managers at all the jet engine companies? Who are all the good players at the jet engine companies? Um, I just placed a fella, 30-year-old superstar. He called me 3 years ago. It's like, this is kind of my background. This is what I'm thinking. I really don't want to do this anymore. This is where I want to be. We built a 3-year relationship. He's a young guy. We built a 3-year relationship. And I said, hey, hang out where you are. Here's what you should be doing. Here's where you focus on. We probably talked once a quarter about where he was at, what he was looking for. Um, Company called me up and said, hey, we're looking for kind of a young superstar in our engine trading business. We'd like somebody who looks like this. Oh, you mean this guy here? There you go. Yeah, that's exactly who we're looking for. 3-year relationship. When they call me, he's a vice president and he just made a 40% increase in his salary. He's happy as a pig in the mud with his career. They're happy with him. You know, that's how you figure it out. So it's work.
Hmm.
It's once again, it's work and it's all about them and it's understanding their needs. And it's like, when the days when you really don't want to take another call, you take another call and you help somebody with something. It's work.
Hmm.
So, but when you're helping other people, that's how you help yourself.
Love that. I'd love to jump to your daily routine, Craig, because I think that was quite interesting. You sound like an insanely disciplined person. You said you get up at 5:30 a.m. It sounds like you're pretty switched on 7 days a week. Can you tell us a little bit about your daily routine and what your life looks like behind the scenes?
Yeah. So 5:30 in the morning is the alarm goes off and there's no hitting snooze. My wife and I are up at 5:30. Coffee till maybe a couple minutes after 6. She goes to the gym. I've got a 105-pound Rottweiler yellow lab mix. He's great. He and I go for a walk. I live close to the beach and we've got about a 1.5 mile track that we go on. I take him out, come back. I go meet a friend of mine, private equity executive, who's fantastic. I learn more about business from him every day, and he learns more about people and people leadership from me every day. We have great conversations. We do a form of CrossFit training for 45, 50 minutes every morning, 7 days a week. And, then I'm in the office about 8:30. From 8:30 till 5:30, 6 o'clock, it's work. I go home for about a half hour for lunch. I live a 1.5 miles. My office is a 1.5 miles from my house. So I go home, meet my wife for lunch. My daughter, if she's not working, also. And then, 5:30, 6 o'clock, we go on I get home, we talk for a little bit. Dog and I go back on a walk. Daughter, wife come with us sometimes, whatever. 7 to 8:30, I'm probably back on the computer answering some emails, whatever. 9 o'clock to 10 o'clock, I'm usually reading Wall Street Journal, talking to my wife, whatever. It's a pretty focused routine during the week. On the
Mm.
weekends, before the gym, my wife and I get up, take the dog for a walk, and then we'll go on a 20-mile bike ride. I'll go meet my friend at the gym. We go have coffee. And then the weekend routine kind of starts all over, but we're not switched off. I'm not switched off
Mm.
very much. Um, I tell people don't be like me. It's, I just, yeah.
What's it like? Because I know when I'm working insanely hard, my part sometimes my partner who loves her work but isn't as much of a fanatic as me tends to get a little bit annoyed at me sometimes. And have you ever had that with your wife, Craig, being like this? It sounds like you're like this fanatical, very hard worker. Is she the same? Does it affect the relationship at all, or is it quite?
No, we
Is
got a
it?
great relationship. We have a lot of fun. We actually have a lot of fun together. I mean, when we're out riding or we're doing stuff together, and yeah, we're out just on the back porch,
Mm,
talking. A lot of times she's reading. I'll get on the computer. I'll just be thinking about something. I'll get on the computer. I blog a lot. I'll start writing, but we're still communicating. We're still talking. We're together. I mean, we've got a great relationship. We're
so
talking.
you've obviously cracked the code. Then I haven't, Craig. So I need
Yeah,
to probably learn from
like
you.
I'm really fortunate. My wife and I we've got a great relationship. We've been married for 26 years. We've been
Wow.
together for
Wow.
30. We're together like on 20 miles in the morning on the weekends. Yeah, we do our own thing at the gym for a while. I go meet some friends for coffee. We'll come back, we have lunch, and then we'll do another 10 miles together, go have some fun, kind of do our thing in the afternoon. But like the afternoons are our time. On the weekends, we
Mm,
have a great time. So it's
that's lovely.
she's been a real partner. It's I don't, people say, "Are you solo in your business?" I'm like, "Yeah." And like, "Well, you have a team?" I go, "No." I
Mm,
go, I do everything myself. And they're like,
wow.
"Why?" Like, because there's a degree of control that I want over everything in my business. So I'm not looking
Mm.
to scale. I'm not looking to sell. I just I have my business. I do great financially with it. I don't have a lot of distractions. I'm just pretty focused in everything I do.
Well, I feel like you're making as much as like teams of 5 to 10, Craig. So it's like I think you're obviously. If I was in your position, I probably would say the same thing. If you're making that amount of money
Yeah.
solo, it's like why do you need to add anything? It's like you can make and save a lot more just being on your own.
Well, that's
Um,
yeah. That's kind of the yeah. That's the deal. People are, well, why don't you grow? And I'm like, well, why? You know,
mm,
you know, yeah. It's not me.
mm.
I know me. And there's people out there that are really good for scaling, and that's not me. So I do what I do, and I just keep my head down.
I just want to go back, Craig, to because you said you meet with your friend every morning who's part of a PE investor firm. That
Mhm.
reminds me of another podcast guest we had. In fact, we've had two, and they said one of the most powerful tools in their toolkit, if not the most powerful, was creating a mastermind with like-minded professionals, entrepreneurs who are hitting at that same level and want to improve. Is that a similar type of relationship? Is it like a mastermind where you guys push each other on and you are trying to improve together? Is that, I'm just curious how that started and the power of that and why
Yeah,
it's
well,
so
yeah,
consistent.
it started out like well, it was kind of funny. I started out is I've got my office in this building here, and he was his office is about 40 feet away, and I saw him every day in the office, and we talked, and I was like, hey, he found out I go to the gym. Back the day I just did my own CrossFit routine, and he found out I went, and he went to the doctor one day. He wasn't real healthy. He wasn't healthy that at all, and he went to the doctor, and he found out how unhealthy he was. He knocked on my door and said, hey, can I start? You've been saying for years, can I come to the gym with me if you want? Can I start that?
Hmm.
And my answer to him was, yeah, but here's the rules. 7 o'clock every morning, don't be late, and we'll do it. And that started 4 years ago. Um, we've become really good friends. He's
Mm.
great. one of the smartest people I know. He's taken 5 companies public.
Wow.
Wow. My God.
He's
That's
been
nuts.
he's an investor in a company now, which he's actually helping to run. That's been a little challenging to him. And so he looks at my perspective on the people's side of the house, and I give him my candid, unfiltered opinions. But then, also too, he's introduced me to a network. I talked about the group of people I go have coffee with. There's 4 of us. One is a professor at the University of North Carolina, Wilmington, and he used to be the managing director of the CFA Academy, very prestigious CFA Academy. And another one's a orthopedic surgeon. He's got his practice going. So the 4 of us go and we talk business, politics, stuff in general, just have a good time. It's really nice to learn from really smart people.
Pretty interesting. Really interesting. And it's like smart people in like different domains, which must be interesting to kind of get different perspectives from people who aren't in recruitment or who are in just, I think it's a really good idea to get smart people in different domains because you get different perspectives, which is very cool.
And your friend Craig, he must be a lot healthier now that he's done it for 4 years. Does he do it? Does he do it every day with you, or is he?
He's doing really well. Yeah, he's done
Okay,
great.
good.
And like I said, it's been a great relationship. It's been a great relationship all the way around. But yeah, really, what it is, it's just become a great friendship.
Awesome.
And but I appreciate where he comes from and the challenge that he talks about. He's still actively involved in all the companies, and we just talk about things, but he gives me perspectives. He gives me perspectives on stuff that I'm like, wow, I never thought about that. Yeah. He talks about my business. He comes in, he puts his feet up on he sits down in this chair over here and he looks at my board. He's talking about it. He goes, have you ever thought about doing X, Y, Z? I'm like, yeah, maybe, yeah, whatever. He gives me some good ideas and I'll roll with them. So it's a
That's really
it's a nice trade-off to have.
Love it. I'm curious, Craig. I'm curious to what like drives you every day because it sounds like you're like Ben said, you're super disciplined. You're obviously in the Navy, so that had an impact on I'm guessing, your kind of routine and discipline. But you sound incredibly driven and focused, like for majority of the time. I'm just curious, what is driving you? Is it like a goal? Is it just your brain's operating like that, and you just need to progress? I'm just wondering.
No, it's funny. Yeah, I'll go back to my personal life. When I was a kid growing up, and my brother and I just did a weekend away. We grew up in a pretty chaotic environment. I'll leave it at that. It was just very chaotic. And then, I went to school. We both went to college. We went our separate ways. And my goal was to fly in the Navy. That's all I wanted to do. And I barely made it through college, but still got to fly in the Navy. And one day I woke up, I said, I don't want chaos in my life. And to me, the eliminating chaos meant taking control. And this is something, look, I don't have control of everything. I'm not a control freak or anything like that, but I have control over my daily routine. I have control over my life. I have control over the things that I can control. And that's what I tell people, when people are, my buddy, the private equity guy, it's like, hey, look, you can't control that. So focus on what you can. Here are the 3 things you can focus on. And then let somebody else worry about that. You got boards of directors, let the board of directors worry about that stuff. And he's like, yeah, that's cool. So that's kind of where it comes from my, that's where it comes from my avenue is, I can control what I can control. I can't control clients. I can't control candidates. I can't control people getting sick. So don't try. What can I control? I can control bringing the best people to the table. I can control how I run my own business. I can control things I say yes to, things I say no to. And that's it.
Love that. Great answer, Craig. Love it.
So to make a real, fear and greed are great motivators
I
to
agree.
everything. So, there's there you go. There's my answer.
Thanks, Craig. I can't believe how quickly this has gone. But it's been so lovely to just meet you and have your perspective on your life and how you recruit some of the best talent in your space. Thank you so much for coming on today, Craig. Really appreciate your time. And hope to have you on again one day.
Ben, Sam, thanks for the time. Thanks for the interview.
Hey guys, thanks for tuning in to this episode. If you enjoyed it, please don't forget to subscribe on YouTube and Spotify. Tune in for another episode next week, and we look forward to seeing you again very soon. Peace and love.